The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty Nevada City depot, and Faith Garrison stepped down onto the hard-packed earth with only a worn carpetbag and the clothes on her back. Everything she owned in the world reduced to what could fit in one small piece of luggage after creditors had seized her father's estate back in Boston. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on her black mourning dress, and sweat already began to dampen the high collar as she surveyed the rough frontier town that would somehow have to become her home. Faith was 20 years old, recently orphaned, and entirely alone in a place that looked nothing like the civilized streets of Massachusetts. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their paint peeling under the relentless desert heat. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats moved about their business, and the sound of a piano playing badly drifted from one of the saloons. She had come west because there was nothing left for her in Boston except debt and scandal. Her father had died suddenly, and the revelation of his financial ruin had followed swiftly. The small inheritance she thought would sustain her turned out to be nothing but promissory notes that would never be honored. A friend of her late mother had mentioned that Nevada City needed a schoolteacher, and Faith had written immediately, exaggerating her qualifications slightly in her desperation. The response had been encouraging enough that she had sold what little she could and bought passage west. Now, standing in the dusty street with the September sun of 1875 blazing overhead, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "Excuse me," Faith approached a woman sweeping the porch of what appeared to be a general store. "Could you direct me to the mayor's office? Or whoever handles civic matters here?" The woman looked her up and down with obvious curiosity. "That would be Mayor Hobbs. His office is above the land office, 3 buildings down on the left. You must be the new school teacher they sent for." "I am, Faith Garrison." "Well, Miss Garrison, I hope you are tougher than you look. This town eats up soft Eastern ladies for breakfast." The woman's expression was not unkind, but her words held a warning that made Faith's stomach clench with anxiety. Faith thanked her and made her way down the street, acutely aware of the attention her mourning dress attracted. She climbed the exterior stairs to the mayor's office and knocked firmly on the door, refusing to let her nervousness show. "Come in," a voice called. The office was small and cluttered with papers. A portly man in his 50s looked up from his desk. "You must be Miss Garrison. We received your telegram that you would arrive today." "Yes, sir. I am ready to begin my duties as soon as possible." Mayor Hobbs frowned and shuffled some papers on his desk. "Yes, well, about that. There has been a small complication." Faith felt her heart sink. "What kind of complication?" "The town council met last week, and there was some concern about hiring a teacher sight unseen. Several members felt we should wait and interview candidates in person. I am afraid the position has been given to someone else, a Mrs. Patterson from Sacramento. She arrived 2 days ago and has already begun setting up the schoolroom." For a moment, Faith could not breathe. The room seemed to tilt around her. "But I came all this way. You responded to my letter with encouragement." "I expressed interest, yes, but I made no firm commitment. Surely you understood that." Faith had understood no such thing. She had read hope into those words because she needed hope so desperately. Now she stood in this cramped office with nowhere to go and no money to get there even if she had somewhere. "I see," she managed to say, though her voice shook. "Is there any other employment available in town?" "I can keep accounts. I sew reasonably well. I can cook and clean." Mayor Hobbs looked uncomfortable. "I honestly do not know. You might ask at the hotel or the restaurants." "I am sorry, Miss Garrison. I truly am." Faith descended the stairs in a daze. The September afternoon pressed around her like a physical weight. She had perhaps $10 to her name. That would pay for a few nights' lodging and some meals. But then what? She could not even afford passage back east, not that she had anything to return to. She walked slowly back toward the depot, trying to think. The hotel the woman had mentioned stood across the street, a two-story building that looked slightly more respectable than its neighbors. Faith crossed to it and entered the dim lobby. The clerk listened to her inquiry and shook his head. "We do not need any help right now. You might try the Silver Star restaurant down the street." The Silver Star did not need help either, nor did the other restaurant, the laundry, or the dressmaker. By the time the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, Faith had walked the entire length of Nevada City's Main Street twice and found no prospects. She sat down on a bench outside the general store, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack. "You look like you have had a rough day." Faith looked up to find a man standing a respectful distance away. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty jeans and a worn shirt, but his boots were good quality and his hat looked new. What struck her most were his eyes, a clear gray that held genuine concern. "I have had better days," Faith admitted, too tired to maintain proper reserve. "I am Marcus Webb. I run a ranch about 5 miles outside town." He touched the brim of his hat politely. "I could not help but notice you have been asking around for work all afternoon. Word travels quickly here, I gather. Small town." He hesitated. "Look, I do not mean to be forward, but are you the lady who was supposed to be the new schoolteacher?" "I was supposed to be. Unfortunately, the position was given to someone else after I had already traveled across the country to claim it." Marcus's expression darkened. "That is Hobbs for you. He encouraged my sister to apply for that job too, then gave it to Patterson's wife because Patterson holds a note on some land Hobbs wants. I am sorry you got caught up in his schemes. It seems I am caught up in a great many difficulties at the moment." Marcus shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable but determined to continue. "I do not know your situation, and I do not mean to pry, but if you need work, I could use some help at my ranch. My housekeeper left last month to live with her daughter in California, and I have been managing on my own, but I am a better rancher than I am a cook or a housekeeper. The pay would not be much, but it includes room and board and it is honest work." Faith looked at him carefully. He seemed sincere, but she knew how dangerous it could be for a woman alone to trust too quickly. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Webb, but I could not possibly impose. It would not be an imposition. I need the help." He seemed to read her hesitation. "Look, I understand your caution. Why do not you ask around town about me? I have lived here for 4 years and I have a good reputation. Take your time, think it over. I will be at the Nugget Saloon having dinner in about an hour if you decide you want to discuss it further. No pressure either way." He tipped his hat again and walked away before Faith could respond. She sat there as the shadows lengthened, considering her options. She had nowhere near enough money to leave town and no prospects for employment here. She could write to acquaintances back east, begging for help, but that would take weeks and she would be destitute long before any response arrived. Finally, she stood and walked back to the general store. The woman who had directed her to the mayor's office earlier was locking up for the evening. "Excuse me," Faith said. "I wonder if you could tell me anything about a man named Marcus Webb. He owns a ranch outside town." The woman's expression brightened. "Marcus? He is one of the good ones, I can tell you that. Came here about 4 years ago and built that ranch up from nothing. He is honest, hardworking, and fair in his dealings. Why do you ask? He offered me employment as his housekeeper." "Did he now?" The woman studied Faith with new interest. His last housekeeper was a widow named Mrs. Chen, a very respectable woman. She spoke highly of him when she left. If you need work, you could do a lot worse than working for Marcus Webb. He will treat you fairly and respectfully. Faith thanked her and made her way to the Nugget Saloon. It was a rough establishment, but not as rough as some of the others she had passed. She stood outside for a moment, gathering her courage. Respectable women did not enter saloons, but then again, respectable women did not find themselves alone and penniless in Nevada mining towns either. She pushed through the doors. The noise level dropped noticeably as the patrons noticed her. Marcus sat at a corner table, and when he saw her, he immediately stood and gestured to the chair across from him. "Miss Garrison, I am glad you came." Faith sat down, aware of the curious stares. "I made inquiries about you, as you suggested. Everyone speaks well of your character." "I am relieved to hear it." A hint of humor touched his eyes. "So what did you decide?" "I would like to accept your offer if it still stands. However, I need to know exactly what the arrangement would be." "Fair enough." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "The ranch house has 4 bedrooms. You would have your own room with a lock on the door. I would expect you to cook meals, keep the house clean, and do laundry. I have 2 ranch hands who work for me, Tom and Eduardo. They bunk in the barn and mostly take care of themselves, but they would expect to be fed too. I can pay you $20 a month plus room and board. You would have Sundays off, and I could bring you to town whenever you needed to come for supplies or church or whatever else." $20 a month was not generous, but it was survival. And the arrangement would be entirely professional. "Entirely." His gray eyes met hers steadily. "I give you my word on that." Faith took a breath. "Then I accept." "Good." Marcus smiled for the first time, and it transformed his serious face. "We can head out to the ranch first thing tomorrow morning. Tonight, I will pay for you to stay at the hotel so you can get a good rest. Do you need anything else? Have you eaten?" "I have not, actually." Marcus ordered them both dinner, and as they ate, he told her about the ranch. He had started with nothing, saved money working other ranches, and finally bought his own land. He raised cattle primarily, but also kept horses. The work was hard, but he loved it. His parents had died when he was young, and he had been on his own since he was 17. He spoke matter-of-factly about hardships that would have broken many men. "What about you?" he asked. "What brought you all the way out here from Boston?" Faith found herself telling him about her father's death, the discovery of his debts, the loss of everything. She had not intended to share so much, but something about Marcus's steady presence made it easy to talk. He listened without judgment, his gray eyes sympathetic. "That is a hard road," he said when she finished. "But you are still standing. That takes strength." "I am not sure I had much choice in the matter." "There is always a choice. You could have given up, but you did not. You came west with nothing but hope, and that says something about your character." Faith felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at his words. No one had acknowledged what she had been through, the courage it had taken to keep going. "Thank you for saying that. I am just speaking the truth." Marcus stood and placed some coins on the table. "Let me walk you to the hotel." The next morning, Faith met Marcus in front of the hotel just after dawn. He helped her into a wagon loaded with supplies, and they set off down the dusty road leading out of town. The early morning air was cool and fresh, and as they left Nevada City behind, Faith felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. The landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way. Scrubby vegetation dotted the rolling hills, and in the distance, mountains rose against the pale sky. Marcus pointed out landmarks as they traveled, keeping up an easy conversation that did not require much response from Faith, as if he sensed she needed time to adjust. The ranch, when they reached it, was more substantial than Faith had expected. The house was a well-built structure of wood and stone, painted white with a covered porch running along the front. Nearby stood a large barn, several corrals and smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Faith could see two men working with horses in one of the corrals. "It is a beautiful place," Faith said sincerely. "I think so." Pride was evident in Marcus's voice. "Come on, let me show you around." The interior of the house was clean but clearly lacked a woman's touch. The furniture was sturdy and functional, the floors swept but needing a good scrubbing. The kitchen was well equipped, the bedrooms sparse but adequate. Marcus showed her to the room that would be hers, a corner room with windows on two walls that let in generous light. "I will let you get settled," Marcus said. "Take your time getting the feel of things. We usually eat breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, and dinner at 6. Nothing fancy, just good solid food. I will introduce you to Tom and Eduardo at lunch." Faith spent the morning exploring the house and taking stock of the supplies. The pantry was reasonably well stocked with basics, though clearly organized by someone with no domestic skills. She found herself reorganizing shelves and making mental lists of what would be needed. At noon, she prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits. Marcus came in with two other men, all of them dusty and tired from the morning's work. Tom was an older man with weathered features and a quiet manner. Eduardo was younger, probably in his early 20s, with an easy smile and friendly demeanor. "Miss Garrison," Tom said respectfully, removing his hat, "we are glad to have you here." "We are tired of Marcus's cooking," Eduardo added with a grin. "No offense, boss. None taken. My cooking is terrible and I know it." Marcus washed up at the basin and sat down at the table. "How are you settling in, Miss Garrison?" "Well enough. I have been making lists of what needs to be done." "Do not try to do everything at once," Marcus advised. "The house has been neglected for a while. It will take time to set things right." The men ate with obvious hunger, and Faith felt a small glow of satisfaction when they praised the meal despite its simplicity. After they left to return to work, she cleaned up, and then began the task of giving the kitchen a thorough cleaning. The work was hard but satisfying. As Faith scrubbed and organized, she felt some of the numbness that had gripped her since her father's death begin to lift. Here, at least, she had a purpose. Here, she could begin to build something, even if it was just clean floors and hot meals. That evening, she prepared a more substantial dinner of roast chicken, potatoes, and greens. The men ate with enthusiasm, and afterwards, Marcus walked her out to the porch. "You are a good cook," he said, "and I can already see a difference in the house. I have barely scratched the surface. Those floors need a serious scrubbing, and the windows have not been washed in months. Like I said, take your time." Marcus leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the darkening landscape. "I want you to feel comfortable here, Miss Garrison. I know this is not what you planned when you came west, but I hope it will work out well for both of us." "I hope so too." Faith surprised herself by meaning it. The days settled into a rhythm. Faith rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning and organizing while the men worked outside. She cooked lunch, then tackled projects like laundry or mending or baking bread in the afternoons. Dinner preparation took up the early evening, and afterwards, she would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Marcus often joined her on the porch after dinner. They would talk about the day's work, about the ranch, about nothing in particular. Faith found herself looking forward to these conversations. Marcus was easy to talk to, with a quiet intelligence and a dry sense of humor that surprised her. He asked her about her life in Boston, genuinely interested in her descriptions of a world so different from this one. "It sounds crowded," he said one evening after she had described the busy streets and tall buildings. It was, sometimes oppressively so, but there was culture too, music and theater and libraries. Do you miss it? Faith considered the question honestly. I miss some things. I miss having access to books and I miss certain friends, but I do not miss the confinement of it, the rigid social rules. Here, it feels like I can breathe. I know what you mean. I grew up in Missouri and I always felt trapped there. Coming west was the best thing I ever did. Even with all the hardships, especially with the hardships, they make you realize what you are made of. He glanced at her. You have adapted well. I thought you might struggle more with the rough conditions. I surprised myself, Faith admitted. I thought I was softer than this too. 3 weeks passed, then 4. Faith transformed the house, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed, making curtains from fabric Marcus bought in town, bringing order and comfort to rooms that had been merely functional. She learned to manage the big cast iron stove, to knead bread dough until it was perfect, to stretch limited supplies into filling meals. She also learned about ranch life. Marcus explained the cattle business to her, the seasonal rhythms of breeding and calving and driving herds to market. He taught her to ride, starting with a gentle mare named Daisy, and Faith discovered she loved the freedom of moving across the open landscape. Tom and Eduardo became friends of a sort. Tom was a widower who had lost his family years ago to illness. He kept to himself mostly, but Faith noticed he would leave small gifts sometimes, a handful of wildflowers or a carved wooden spoon. Eduardo was more outgoing, always ready with a joke or a story about his large family back in Texas, but it was Marcus who occupied more and more of Faith's thoughts. She found herself watching for him during the day, listening for his step on the porch. She noticed things about him, the way he was always gentle with the horses, how he treated Tom and Eduardo with respect and fairness, how hard he worked to make his dream of a successful ranch a reality. She was falling in love with him. Faith realized one October morning as she watched him work with a young horse in the corral. The realization should have frightened her, but instead, it felt like something inevitable, as natural as the sunrise. Marcus seemed to be spending more time near the house, finding excuses to check on things that did not really need checking. Their evening conversations on the porch grew longer. Sometimes, they sat in comfortable silence, and Faith thought that was even better than talking, to be so comfortable with someone that words were not necessary. One Sunday, Marcus offered to take Faith into town for church services and shopping. They set out early in the wagon, the October morning cool and pleasant. At church, a small building that served multiple denominations, Faith was introduced to more of the townspeople. Several women made a point of speaking to her, their curiosity barely concealed. After church, while Faith shopped for supplies, Marcus waited outside the general store, chatting with other ranchers. She was comparing prices on fabric when she heard raised voices outside. "I am telling you, Webb, you need to be more careful," a man was saying loudly. "Having an unmarried woman living in your house looks bad. People talk. People should mind their own business," Marcus replied, his voice tight with anger. "I am just trying to help. That girl is young and alone. If you care about her reputation, you will do the right thing." Faith felt her face burn with embarrassment. She had not considered how her living arrangement might appear to others. In her desperation, she had thought only of survival, not of propriety. She finished her purchases quickly and met Marcus at the wagon. His expression was stormy, and they rode out of town in tense silence. "I am sorry," Marcus finally said when they were well away from Nevada City. "That was Patterson, the man whose wife got the teaching job. He is a self-righteous fool, and he had no right to speak to you like that." He was not entirely wrong. Faith said quietly. "I have been so focused on managing day to day that I did not think about how the situation might appear. You have done nothing wrong. You are working an honest job, and that is all anyone needs to know. But appearances matter, especially for a woman. If people think badly of me, it could reflect on you too." Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "There is one way to stop the gossip entirely." Faith's heart began to beat faster. "What way is that?" "We could get married." The words hung in the air between them. Faith could not breathe. "That would solve the problem," she managed to say. "It would." Marcus pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. "But I do not want you to think I am suggesting it just because of gossip. The truth is, I have grown fond of you, Faith. More than fond. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I have known in a long time. I like having you at the ranch. I like talking to you in the evenings. I like the way you have made my house into a real home. I know we have not known each other long, but I think we could build a good life together. Marcus." Faith felt tears sting her eyes. "I have grown fond of you too, very fond. Then what do you say? Will you marry me? Not just to stop gossip, but because we care for each other and could be happy together." Faith thought about her life before coming west, the rigid conventions and limited options. She thought about these past weeks, the freedom and purpose she had found. She thought about Marcus, his kindness and strength, and the way her heart lifted when he smiled at her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Marcus's face lit up with a smile that transformed him. He took her hand carefully, as if afraid she might vanish. "You have made me very happy." "You have made me happy too," Faith said, realizing it was true. Against all odds in this harsh landscape, she had found something precious. They were married 2 weeks later in the same small church where they had attended services. Faith wore a dress she made herself from blue fabric Marcus insisted on buying, the color bringing out her eyes. Tom and Eduardo stood as witnesses, along with the store owner's wife who had befriended Faith. The ceremony was simple, but as Faith spoke her vows, she meant every word. This was not the life she had imagined for herself back in Boston, but it was real and honest. And the man standing beside her was worth more than all the society beaux who had courted her before her father's death. At the ranch that evening, Tom and Eduardo tactfully made themselves scarce. Marcus built a fire in the fireplace as the November evening turned cold. He poured them each a small glass of whiskey he had been saving. "To us," he said, raising his glass. "To us," Faith echoed. They sat by the fire, and for the first time Marcus kissed her properly. It was gentle at first, then deeper, and Faith felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire or the whiskey. "I love you," Marcus said against her hair. "I know I should have said it before now, but I wanted to be sure you did not feel pressured." "I love you too," Faith said, surprised by how easily the words came. "I think I have loved you since that first day when you found me on that bench, lost and hopeless, and offered me a chance. You came here with nothing but hope," Marcus said. "And I thought to myself that hope and love are all we really need. Everything else can be built on that foundation." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, and afterwards, lying in Marcus's arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, Faith marveled at how completely her life had changed. 2 months ago, she had been destitute and alone. Now she had a home, a purpose, and a love she had never expected to find. The winter was hard that year. Snow came early and deep, isolating the ranch for weeks at a time. But Faith found she did not mind. The house was warm, supplies were adequate, and she was happy. She and Marcus grew closer through the long winter evenings, learning each other's stories, hopes, and dreams. She learned that Marcus had a gift for carving wood and spent winter evenings creating beautiful pieces. He made her a jewelry box with her initials carved into the lid. She taught him to read better, as his education had been limited, and they spent hours going through the few books she had brought from Boston. Tom and Eduardo became like family. Tom taught Faith to play chess, and she discovered she was good at it. Eduardo taught her Spanish phrases that made Marcus laugh. The four of them would sit around the dinner table long after the meal was finished, talking and laughing and creating the kind of easy warmth that came from genuine affection. Spring came late, but glorious. The snow melted, revealing the brown landscape that would soon green up. Marcus threw himself into the work of the ranch, preparing for calving season. Faith helped where she could, learning to bottle feed orphaned calves and assist with difficult births. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Faith told Marcus the news she had been keeping for a week, wanting to be certain. "I am expecting a baby," she said quietly. "I think it will come in early October." Marcus's expression went through several changes before settling on pure joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart pounding. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her face. Are you feeling well?" "I am feeling wonderful. A little sick in the mornings, but the doctor said that is normal." "When did you see a doctor?" "Last week when you took me to town for supplies. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Marcus kissed her soundly. "A baby! Lord, Faith, you have given me everything. A home, a family, a future I never dreamed of." "You gave me those things too," Faith said. "You saved my life that day in town, whether you know it or not. I had nothing left, and you offered me hope when I had none." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Faith continued her work around the house, though Marcus fussed and tried to make her rest more than she wanted. Her belly grew round, and she felt the baby move, those first flutters that grew into definite kicks. In September, Marcus made several trips to town, bringing back supplies for the baby. He built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, carving it with delicate designs. Faith sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. The baby came on a cool October evening, exactly a year after Marcus had proposed. The labor was long and difficult, with only the doctor from town and the store owner's wife to help. Marcus paced outside, Tom and Eduardo keeping him company. Near midnight, the cry of a newborn filled the house. The store owner's wife opened the door, smiling. "You have a son, Marcus, a healthy baby boy, and your wife is tired but doing well." Marcus rushed inside to find Faith propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at his son with wonder. "He is perfect," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "He is," Faith agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at the baby's tiny face, Marcus said, "What about Samuel? It was my father's name." "Samuel Webb," Faith said, testing the sound. "I like it. Samuel it is." The baby thrived, growing strong and healthy. He had Marcus's dark hair and Faith's blue eyes. Marcus was a devoted father, rushing through his work so he could spend time with his son. Faith had never seen him so happy, and her own happiness felt almost too large to contain. Tom carved toys for Samuel, and Eduardo sang him Spanish lullabies. The ranch prospered too. The cattle herd grew, and Marcus was able to hire 2 more hands to help with the increased work. The house needed an addition, and Marcus spent his spare time that winter building on 2 more rooms. When Samuel was 6 months old, Faith discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was easier, and in the fall of 1877, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. 2 years later came another son, Thomas, named after Tom, who had become like a grandfather to the children. The ranch continued to grow. Marcus's reputation for honest dealing and quality cattle spread, and the business flourished. They added more land, built new barns, and increased the herd substantially. What had started as one man's dream had become a substantial operation. Faith established a small school on the ranch, teaching not only her own children but also the children of the ranch hands and neighboring families. It was not the teaching position she had originally come west to claim, but it was more satisfying in many ways because it was entirely her own creation. Tom retired from active ranch work, but stayed on in a cottage Marcus built for him, helping with small tasks and spending hours with the children who adored him. Eduardo eventually married a girl from town and brought her to live on the ranch, where he continued to work as Marcus's right hand. The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. There were hard times, droughts and cattle diseases, the death of beloved friends. Tom passed away peacefully in his sleep when Samuel was 12, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had helped build. But the good times far outweighed the hard ones. Faith sometimes thought back to that desperate girl who had stepped off the stagecoach in Nevada City with nothing but a carpetbag and fading hope. She barely recognized herself in that memory. The woman she had become was stronger, more capable, more alive than she had ever been in her old life. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Faith up to the hill where they had buried Tom. It had become a family cemetery, where they had also laid to rest Eduardo's wife, who had died in childbirth years before, though the baby, a girl named Maria, had survived and thrived under Faith's care. "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked as they looked out over the ranch spread below them. "Marrying me, staying here instead of going back east." Faith turned to look at her husband. He was 50 now, his dark hair touched with gray, his face lined from years in the sun. He was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This life, this family, this love we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me everything when I had nothing." "You gave me everything too," Marcus said, pulling her close. "That day I found you sitting on that bench in town, you looked so lost and so brave at the same time. I did not plan to offer you a job. I was just going to say something kind and move on. But then I saw your eyes and I could not walk away. I am glad you did not. So am I. You know what I thought that day? I thought this woman came all this way with nothing but hope, and then I thought hope and love are all we really need. Everything else is just details." "You were right," Faith said. "We built everything we have on exactly that foundation." They stood together watching the sun set over their land, over the life they had created together. Below them, they could see Samuel working with horses in the corral, a young man of 24 now, as capable and hardworking as his father. Rose was probably in the house preparing dinner, having inherited her mother's domestic skills and her father's head for business. Thomas, at 21, was the dreamer of the family, talking about going to California to study agriculture at the new university there, though Faith suspected he would ultimately return to the ranch he loved. The house had grown over the years, additions sprouting organically as the family expanded. The original structure was still at its heart, but now it sprawled comfortably, surrounded by gardens Faith had coaxed from the harsh soil. The barn had been replaced twice, each time larger than before. The cattle that grazed on their land numbered in the thousands now, making the ranch one of the most successful in the territory. "We should head back," Marcus said as the last light faded from the sky. "Rose will have dinner ready, and you know how she worries if we are late." They walked down the hill hand in hand, comfortable in the silence that had grown between them over 25 years of marriage. It was the silence of two people who knew each other completely, who had weathered storms together and celebrated triumphs together, who had built something lasting through sheer determination and love. Dinner that evening was a boisterous affair. Samuel had brought his wife Catherine and their two young children. Rose's beau, a young rancher from a neighboring property, had been invited as well, and Faith suspected an engagement announcement would be forthcoming soon. Thomas kept them laughing with stories from his week in town. After dinner, the family gathered in the parlor. Samuel's children, a boy of 4 and a girl of 2, played on the floor with wooden animals Tom had carved years ago. Catherine, who was expecting again, rested on the sofa with her feet up. Rose and her beau sat close together, speaking quietly. Faith looked around the room at the family she and Marcus had created and felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what mattered. Not the size of the ranch or the success of the business, though those things were good. What mattered was the love that filled this house, the bonds between these people, the legacy they were building together. That night, lying in bed with Marcus's arm around her, Faith said, "Thank you." For what? For seeing me that day. For offering me hope when I needed it most. For loving me. "Thank you for saying yes," Marcus replied. "For taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than money. For building this life with me. It has been a good life." "The best," Marcus agreed. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms as they had every night for 25 years. The following spring, Rose married her rancher, and they built a house on the southern section of the ranch property. Samuel announced that Catherine was expecting twins, news that sent Faith into a flurry of preparation. Thomas left for California, promising to return, though Faith knew her youngest son had wanderlust in his blood that might take him far from Nevada before he was ready to settle. Marcus, at 51, finally agreed to let Samuel take over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch. He still worked, still loved the feel of a good horse under him and the satisfaction of a hard day's labor. But he also spent more time with Faith, more time with his grandchildren, more time simply enjoying the life they had built. On a warm June evening, Marcus and Faith rode out to check on a section of fence in the far pasture. It was unnecessary. Samuel and the hands had already done it, but Marcus used it as an excuse to spend time alone with his wife in the landscape he loved. They dismounted near a creek and let the horses drink. Marcus spread a blanket on the grass, and they sat together watching the water flow past. "You remember that first ride out to the ranch?" Marcus asked. "You were so quiet, and I could tell you were scared but trying not to show it." "I was terrified," Faith admitted. "I had no idea what I was getting into. But you did it anyway. You have always been braver than you think you are." "I had good reason to be brave. I had hoped that things could get better, and I had you." Marcus took her hand. "When I told you that hope and love were all we needed, I meant it. But I had no idea just how much we could build with those two things. Look at what we have created, Faith. Not just the ranch, but our family, our legacy, our children and grandchildren, this whole life." "We did it together," Faith said. "I could not have done any of it without you." "Same here." Marcus leaned over and kissed her, a kiss that held 26 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. They sat by the creek until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. The horses grazed nearby, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed. It was peaceful and perfect, a moment Faith knew she would remember forever. As they rode back to the house in the gathering dusk, Faith reflected on the journey that had brought her here. That desperate girl who had arrived with nothing but hope had found not just survival but abundance. She had found love, purpose, family, and home. She had found herself. The ranch house came into view, lights glowing warmly in the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Faith could see figures moving inside. Samuel's oldest boy ran out to meet them, excited about something that had happened that day. This was home. This was family. This was everything that mattered. Marcus helped Faith down from her horse, his hands steady and sure. He smiled at her, that same smile that had won her heart all those years ago, and Faith smiled back. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Marcus replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They walked into the house together, into the warmth and light and love, into the life they had built from nothing but hope. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the family story. The twins Catherine delivered were girls, identical and mischievous, keeping everyone entertained and exhausted. Rose had 3 children in quick succession, and her husband's ranch merged with Marcus's, creating an even larger operation that spanned thousands of acres. Thomas returned from California with a degree and new ideas about ranch management and breeding programs. He settled back into ranch life with enthusiasm, courting and eventually marrying a schoolteacher from town. They built a house on the northern section of the property, completing the family compound. Marcus and Faith became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing dynasty. Grandchildren multiplied, and then great-grandchildren began to arrive. The ranch continued to prosper under the combined management of their 3 children, each bringing their own strengths to the operation. Faith continued teaching the growing number of children on the ranch until she was well into her 60s. She had taught dozens of children over the years, many of whom went on to successful lives throughout the West. Several became teachers themselves, carrying on her legacy. Marcus worked until he was 70, finally retiring fully when Faith insisted he needed to slow down. Even then, he could not stay away from the ranch work entirely. He would ride out with Samuel or Thomas, offering advice and expertise gained from decades of experience. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw a celebration that brought together more than 100 people. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the ranch house and spilled out onto the grounds. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple who had become legends in the territory. As Faith stood beside Marcus, surrounded by the enormous family they had created, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Every person here was connected to that moment 40 years ago, when a desperate young woman met a kind cowboy who offered her hope. "Quite a turnout," Marcus said, his arm around her waist. "Quite a life," Faith replied. Samuel stood to give a toast, his own hair now graying at the temples. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "They built all of this, not just the ranch but the family, the legacy. They showed us that with hope and love, anything is possible. They taught us to work hard, to treat people fairly, to value family above everything. Everything we are, everything we have, comes from their example." To Marcus and Faith Webb. "To Marcus and Faith," the crowd echoed, glasses raised. Faith felt tears on her cheeks. Marcus gently wiped them away. "Happy tears?" he asked. "The happiest," she confirmed. The celebration continued long into the night with music and dancing and storytelling. The grandchildren begged for stories of the old days, and Marcus and Faith took turns recounting tales of the early years, the hardships and triumphs, the growth of the ranch from a dream into reality. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Faith and Marcus sat on the porch steps, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sounds of family floated from inside the house, children being settled for sleep, adults still talking and laughing. "If you could go back," Marcus said quietly, "back to that day in Nevada City, Knowing everything that would happen, all the hard work and challenges ahead, would you still say yes? Faith did not hesitate. In a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy has been worth it. This life with you has been beyond anything I ever imagined. I feel the same way. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. We found each other, Faith corrected. Both of us lost, both of us hoping for something better. We built this together, Marcus. Everything we have, we created through love and work and faith in each other. Marcus took her hand, his grip still strong despite his 70 years. Hope and love, he said. That is what I told you all those years ago, that it was all we needed. And you were right, Faith said. It was all we needed, and it gave us everything. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, hands intertwined. Inside, their family continued the celebration. Outside, the ranch stretched away into the darkness, thousands of acres of dreams made real. Marcus and Faith lived well into their 80s, remaining active and engaged with the ranch and family until the end. Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning, Faith beside him as she had been for 53 years. She grieved deeply, but took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. Faith lived another 3 years, spending her days surrounded by family, telling stories of the early days to great and great-great-grandchildren. She spoke often of the day she arrived in Nevada City with nothing but hope, of the cowboy who had offered her a chance, of the life they had built together from that fragile foundation. On a warm October afternoon, Faith sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching Samuel's great-grandson work with horses in the corral. He moved with the same easy grace his great-grandfather had possessed, and Faith smiled at the continuity of it. Rose sat beside her, gray-haired now but still strong. "Are you comfortable, Mama? Do you need anything?" "I am perfect, sweetheart," Faith said, "just enjoying the day." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in glorious colors, Faith felt a deep sense of peace. She had lived a full life, rich with love and purpose and family. She had survived losses and celebrated triumphs. She had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. She thought of Marcus, gone 3 years now but still present in every part of this place they had built together. She could almost feel him beside her, his hand in hers, his voice saying the words that had sustained them through 5 decades. Hope and love. That was all they had needed. Everything else had grown from that simple foundation. As the last light faded from the sky, Faith closed her eyes, content and complete. She had arrived with nothing but hope and found everything she could ever need. The Webb Ranch continued to thrive for generations, each one adding their own chapters to the story. But it all traced back to that autumn day in 1875, when a desperate young woman and a kind cowboy met in a dusty Nevada town and chose to build a life together, trusting in hope and love to see them through. Their graves stood on the hill overlooking the ranch, side by side under a spreading oak tree. The simple headstones bore their names and dates, but more importantly, they bore witness to a love that had created something extraordinary from the smallest of beginnings. And on warm evenings, when the sunset painted the sky and the sounds of family drifted from the house below, it seemed almost possible to see them there still, hands clasped, watching over the legacy they had built together, a legacy of hope and love that would endure for generations to come.